Hello everyone, and welcome. My name is Mr. Lloyd, also known as the Critter Man. For tonight's class, we are going to take a closer look at the anatomy, reproduction, growth, feeding, as well as some other interesting facts about 3 different species. And those species are snakes, lizards, and turtles. But not only are we going to learn some interesting new facts about those 3 critters, we'll also take a closer look at some of the equipment that professionals use to capture and handle these 3 species, usually for research purposes. Now, before we dive into all this interesting information, I'd like to remind you that these species, snakes, lizards, and turtles, are living things and will defend themselves violently if necessary. So please, in no way, shape, or form should you ever try to handle any one of these species by either touching, catching, or any other form of physical contact. It's best to observe these critters from a safe distance, because as we'll learn, some of these animals are either venomous, poisonous, or pack a very painful bite. Okay, well, let's get started. Let's begin with the anatomy of snakes. Now, as you can see behind me, I have 2 different forms of snakes. We have your typical snake, and we also have the pit viper. Now, pit vipers are venomous, and they inject this venom into your blood system by using two fangs that are sharp as hypodermic needles. And it can cause a lot of damage, perhaps even death. Now, one way to be able to tell these two apart is not only their head shape, as you can see here, but also by their eyes. If we take a look at your typical snake, like a garter snake, for instance, or even a corn snake, it has a more rounded off head. Same thing goes with the top view of this snake's head. And if you take a look at its eyes, you'll see they're very similar to our eyes, which means round, and they have a round pupil. Let's take a look at the pit viper. From a side view, you'll see it has a more rugged head design. Lots of bumps and curves and things like that. But if you take a look at the eye, it has like a cat's eye, or a cat's pupil. It's more, now, taking a look at the top view of a pit viper's head, kind of resembles a shovel or an arrowhead. It goes kind of like that, almost triangular even. Some pit vipers will even just give it away that they're dangerous by their tail. Rattlesnakes, hence the name, have a rattle on the tip of their tail. And when they feel threatened or in danger, they'll shake this rattle real rapidly, and it'll create a sound that kind of sounds like a constant ticking, or just, straight up a baby's rattle. And that lets you know to back off and don't go any closer, or he's gonna strike. So, how do pit vipers and regular snakes sense these things? Well, let me tell you. If we take a look at the regular snake, they have a tongue like that, also called a forked tongue, which can sense their bellies. Pit vipers have an extra sensory organ right here. Heat sensing pits. Kind of like something from a sci-fi movie, right? Well, this is real. As something walks past, whether it be a food source or a threat, these heat-sensing pits on the side of their face will detect this. Anything that gives off a heat source. So, not only do snakes have eyesight, some have heat-sensing pits, vibration detection, and they can use their tongue to sense things. So, snakes are loaded with all sorts of senses and ways to hunt for food, as well as protect themselves. Now, let's take a look at a snake's skeletal structure. And you'll be surprised at how many ribs a snake has. So here we have the skeleton of a snake. Now, if you'll see here, here is the skull of the snake, followed by a very long vertebrae, all the way down to the tip of his tail, followed by hundreds of ribs all throughout the snake. Now, these ribs and bones of a snake are not as strong as ours are. If you've ever seen fish bones and how delicate they are, the same goes with a snake. And the vertebrae is so delicate. That's why handling a snake, it's not the best thing to be holding up a snake like this, letting it dangle. The vertebrae can stretch and then therefore would harm the snake. And we'll discuss in a little bit some of the ways professionals use to properly handle snakes without stressing them or harming them. Let's take a closer look at the skull. Let's take a closer look at the skull of a snake. More precisely, the skull of a pit viper. Now, as you can see here, see how precise and how fragile the vertebrae are? There's hundreds of them. The fangs, just as I was talking about, some have very long fangs and they're sharp, real sharp. They can pierce the skin, pierce muscle tissue, right into the veins. Now, the fangs are not the only teeth they have. They also have rear teeth, as well as teeth on the bottom jaw. And those are used for grip or holding that food item in place so it can't escape. They inject the venom via the fangs and let nature take its course. Afterwards, they swallow it whole. Now, some snakes actually constrict their prey. This means they use their body to wrap around their prey, squeezing it tight and suffocating it. Then they come up from above and always eat it head first. It's easier to take it down when you're going in the direction the fur grows. But we'll go head first and just swallow it right down. Now, let's take a look at a couple more ways to tell the difference between a venomous and non-venomous snake. As I was saying, with the bird's eye view of the head of a snake, with the venomous snake, there's a lot of them. Not all, but a lot of them, especially the pit vipers. They have this peculiar shovel or arrow-shaped head, where with a non-venomous snake, most of them, they have this more oval or rounded off shaped head. Now, another way to identify them. A venomous snake, if you take a look at the underside of their tail, the scales are single road. And of course, some have a rattle at the end. Very straightforward. We take a look at a non-venomous snake's scales under the tail. The scales are can see the difference. Non-venomous snake has more clustered scales underneath, where the venomous snake has more uniform scales. Now, before we move on to turtle anatomy, we're going to discuss a little bit about the reproduction and growth of snakes. Now, before we finish up with snakes, digging into their reproduction and growth, let's go back to the anatomy of the snake. We've seen their skeletal structure. Now let's see where all the organs, the heart, the lungs, stomach, let's see where all that fits into place. I have a chart here that shows us this. You can see how close everything is just stuffed in there. Up here we have the left lung. Down here we have the right lung, the heart, the stomach, and the small intestine, as well as the liver. So you can see how tight and compact a snake is. And that's why, you gotta be careful when handling snakes. And with a body like that, where you have hundreds of ribs and hundreds of very delicate and precise vertebrae, all mixed in with all of your vital organs just stuffed in there like a sausage. Very, very fragile. Now, let's finish with the reproduction, growth, and feeding of snakes. I have a little excerpt here that I'm going to read this information to you all. Starting with the reproduction. Mating can occur from spring all the way to fall, depending on the species. Snakes give birth in one of two ways. Species that lay eggs, such as the black rat snake, are termed oviparous. Other species, including garter snakes, water snakes, and Pennsylvania's 3 venomous species, give birth to live young and are termed ovoviviparous. Young are usually born or hatch in late summer or early fall. Egg or embryo development ranges from about 8 to 12 months. Reproduction in ovoviviparous species, such as the timber rattlesnake, first occurs at 3 to 7 years after birth. Some species may also bear young only at 2 to 3 year intervals. The number of eggs or young produced varies depending on the species. Growth. Now, like all snakes, they grow very rapidly. And the way they do this is their bodies enlarge until the skin must be shed for growth to continue. Young snakes can shed 4 or more times per year during the first 2 years of life. That's a lot. As adults, they may shed only once or twice per year. Now, when a snake is about to shed, you'll be able to know this by looking at their eyes. Their eyes will start to look a bluish tint. That means the snake's about ready to shed. And I know me personally, I love to go around and find snake skins that have been shed. It's real interesting. And they actually tell quite a bit about the snake. So, it's really neat. Now, when they're about to shed, or when they start shedding, they'll rub up against things to try to peel the skin off their body. It's a kind of a stressful time for them. And some of them will show that to you. They can be very, very spunky when it comes to shedding time. So, and finally, food or feeding. Now, most snakes usually eat anything smaller than themselves. We're talking insects, grasshoppers, crickets, worms, such and so forth, toads, frogs, mice, rats, And some snakes will actually eat other snakes. Well, it looks like we're running out of time. So, I'm going to show you some of the equipment used to capture and handle snakes. Next class, we will continue with turtles and lizards. And if we have time, alligators, caiman, and crocodiles. Now, the first item I'd like to show you is the snake pole. As you can see, it's made quite long, and this is good, especially for handling venomous snakes that at times can strike the length of their body. So, now, as you'll see here, it has a hook at the end. And this is for scooping up the snake. Now, one of the best ways to scoop up a snake is by using a tree branch, a bushy tree branch, which is, in my opinion, a lot better than the snake pole. And the reason for this is a bushy tree branch will not only support the snake's body, but will also be more comfortable and more stress-free for the snake. Next, we have containment. And this is a specially made bucket just for venomous snakes. It's deep enough. Quite a large bucket. And if you take a look at the top, you'll see all these holes around the lid. And this is so the snake can breathe and not suffocate. There's many forms of snake containment. This just so happens to be one of the more safer and easier ways to contain a snake. There are also bags that kind of look like a sleeping bag or a pillow cover. And these are also good. But there's a process that you must go through when using a bag. You first are going to have to make sure it stays in the bag. And you do this by twisting the top and then tying the bag shut. place the snake inside and screw the lid back on, and you're done. Well, I hope that you all enjoyed this class, and I hope to see you next time. Again, we will be learning about turtles, lizards, alligators, caiman, and